Hey, folks, and welcome back to the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we're talking about where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how to stop those leaks, and even how to bring women back when they have left the water workforce. And we are so fortunate today to have a very special guest with us, Liji Thomas, Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, first ever, I think.
That's right.
For the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Liji, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Kat. Happy to be here.
And just to kind of set the stage, because we kind of, perhaps if you watch some of the other, now we're up to almost 50 sessions, we may have mentioned what's going on in Southern California, but just kind of setting the stage a little bit, because I think it's one of the biggest stories that nobody's talking about in the water workspace. And I think it's time that we can start to have those conversations. And so just for those of you who aren't familiar, let's see if I can get this together. So basically about, I think it's 18 months ago now, by the beginning of 2022, no, must have been 2021. It was early in the year. Anyway, LA Times started publishing these stories, about women getting bullied and harassed in their internship programs, and it went on for a while, and basically, and then retaliated against if they said something.
Right.
And there was a series of these stories, and part of what happened as a result, it was a time when the leadership at the time retired, and they brought in a good friend of, for many of us in the water space. This is a video that I did interviewing Adel Hagekhalil, who at the time was with LA Sanitation, and he was also president of National Association of Clean Water Agencies. So someone who's very well known in the industry, and someone who's very committed to supporting communities of color and diversity within the workforce. One of the leaders of the Utility of the Future movement. And he actually, during this interview that you can see, this was my very first time I did that. This is what I was doing, the little Hawaiian shirt, and hey, be in the know with the Wah Wah Mojo, and like loosening people up so they didn't talk like engineers usually do when they're being interviewed.
Sure.
And he starts telling me about this Green Alleys program. And so the next time I was in LA, I said, hey, I'm going to be out there. He has his people pick me up at the airport. We spent like a whole day in South Central LA looking at the ways that they were taking permeable pavement and working with community groups and using that as a way to clean up areas that had been overrun with gangs and wasn't a safe place for kids to come home. And it is an incredible project. So, just give you a context of who the new leadership is. And we're very grateful that Adel let us have this interview here. So, here you have someone who's very dedicated for DEI, but even with, and perhaps because they were still in the process of, and we're not going to get into details of what happened, you can read that, but even with the process of kind of figuring out what's next after the situation that had arisen, how do we create a new model for the water industry? Because there was a state audit that came out right like weeks before this, celebrating diversity in the water workforce. And it's like, not everything is something worth celebrating. We actually have to look at the things that aren't working.
Yes.
Not just, celebration and success stories. So from that context, get us up to speed with what's going on.
Sure. Happy to. And
Spotlight. Oh, I'm kidding.
I love the way you set up the conversation, Dr. Kat, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about a topic that I am deeply passionate and committed to, not only here at MET for the work we do, but for the water industry in general. So, you rightfully pointed out that, there have been things that have happened at Met that should have never happened. That being said, everything is either a problem or an opportunity, and we have a lot of opportunity I can't rewrite the past. We can't rewrite the past for Met,
Right.
but we can definitely be focused on how do we create a future, the next chapter of Met, where there's just as much focus on our people as there are on the pipes. And so, and specifically speaking about women in water and what we've done at Met. So I am now about 10 months in to my role as the inaugural chief DEI officer for Met. And along with so many amazing partners at Met, we've really taken a holistic systems point of view around our hiring, our HR practices, looking at everything from, are we mitigating any potential bias in our hiring, in our promotion, looking at the entire cycle in retirements, in transfers, etc. And not only creating the procedure, we're looking at proactive data-driven insight. So we are looking at hiring, promotion, all of the key stages of the HR life cycle with an analytic data-driven point of view, so
Right.
that we can identify glass ceilings, areas of concern before they really become hotspots for us. And then, in terms of hiring, water industries, not just Met, water industry tends to be heavily male dominated. I'm actually a recovering auditor, and one of the audit tricks I often use is to ask why 5 times before you get to root cause. So why is that there are not as many women in the water industry? And it has to do with where we're casting our nets. Today, it's hogwash to say you cannot find qualified women. It's about where we're casting our nets, or we're really leaning into our outreach efforts. And then also, are there artificial barriers in the system? Are there barriers that, for example, one of the conversations that, quite honestly, I was just having this morning is, for many of our positions, at a certain level and above, they require a college degree. Well, if you have 30 years of experience in a pump plant, do you really need a college degree so are there artificial, and these are conversations that are not only happening in the water industry, but they're happening in talent management conversations. So I think we have to look at this conversation holistically.
And I even get that myself. I have a PhD in civil engineering. I have a master's in environmental science and engineering. Colorado State, Chapel Hill, great school. I've bachelor's in government from Dartmouth, a bachelor's in geology from NC State, and almost finished a 3rd bachelor's, which I was like, 3 bachelors, that's excessive. Civil engineering. I was a senior design project away, but I had this fellowship waiting for me. So I left to go start my PhD.
Yeah.
Biggest mistake ever. So many places, it's like, unless you have a BSCE, you don't even get past, and so I'll put it out there, BSCE, all but senior design, but I mean, I don't want to lie or anything, but it's like, I took all the basic courses. I'm eligible for the IT, but they don't, even with all the other graduate degrees, it's like crazy.
Absolutely. So there's this notion about skills first hiring. Do you have the requisite skills to do the job? Whether or not you have a college degree. Now, for some things, engineering, for example, we will continue to insist on a college degree.
I mean, if you're doing the design, that's one thing. If you're doing the project management, if you're doing business development,
Yeah, absolutely. So the point there, Dr. Cat, is, are there artificial barriers in the system that are leaving not only women, not only underrepresented talent? And here's from 10 plus years of doing this work, when we solve these issues for those who are on the margins, we solve it for everybody. And so if we can lean in, who are on the margins of the water industry, women are chronically underrepresented at every level in the organization. And so therefore it is, so yes, we have had things, painful points of Met's past. I will tell you that not only are we focused on the future, we're taking a systems point of view, we're increasing our outreach efforts. We are also trying to leverage, so instead of, punishing truth tellers, we're trying to leverage their experience and to help us, partner with us to figure out how can we write the next chapter in what we're trying to build is really the most inclusive, equitable, socially and environmentally conscious public institution on earth. And if that sounds really bold, it's intentionally meant to be bold, because there is such a compelling case around advancing water industry in a way that best serves all of us. And women are such an underrepresented segment and valuable resource in water, and so there really is no time to waste when it comes to making transformational change.
Yeah. And I think, we've done a good job of, awareness raising and having people share their stories. Sharing stories doesn't do any good unless you actually follow that up with action, with procedures. We have a lot of stories about, our agency, our CEO, our GM, or whatever, is so supportive. Isn't that wonderful? It's like, yeah, but when leadership changes, that can change like that.
That's right. And the proof is in the outcomes. The proof is in, we often talk about show me the receipts. Show me the proof that, so as we start to, and it's not any one thing. And if we don't look at this holistically, we could do a bang up job of bringing women in. But if they can't see a future at Met, if there's not a culture where they feel seen, valued, celebrated, psychologically safe, then they're going to leave. And today there is a global war for diverse talent. And I mean, not to mention the pandemic, we have rolled back gender diversity progress in our institutions because of that's the topic of a whole different conversation, what the pandemic did to women's participation in the labor market. But suffice it to say, we've rolled back a lot of progress. So now is the time to really lean in, but to do it at every point of the employee experience, and to look at it from a woman's point of view. What is not working? And we're really leveraging the enormous talent and insight of our own people, including some of the women that have been featured in the LA Times article. And so we're really partnering with some of those women to help us write a new chapter for them.
Good. And by the way, I have a theory on
Go for it. I would love to hear it.
Well, so I had actually moved out to San Diego for a job that dematerialized when I got there, but I was in San Diego for a good while, and found out about this operators program out in Cuyamaca College that it's the oldest in the state, possibly the oldest in the country, and they built out this great facility and everything. It's like, how are we going to get people to come all the way out to the desert, the East County, San Diego? We'll get a grant to recruit women, right? And so they started doing these meetings. They started recruiting women, and then they started having a conference. And there's so many women in San Diego, partly because they had Maureen was head of San Diego Water Authority, and from what I've seen, every time there is a woman at the top, you start seeing women at the lower level. So a lot of the smaller towns in San Diego County were led by women. And so these two guys are like, I wonder if any women want to work in water. The year I was there, they couldn't even fill they had to like get another room across campus and like split up the people who wanted to start school and the other women in the other room. And there were so many women, and that really launched the San Diego Women in Water. But the other thing that happened is that suddenly, and I think a lot of the universities that get some of the billions of dollars that have been spent on universities to get more women in the front end of the pipeline, which is where everyone focuses, don't really communicate with the people who are on the receiving end of all these new graduates. So suddenly we're pumping out all these new women operators.
Yeah.
In a field that perhaps wasn't prepared to have a sudden influx of women.
Yes, so absolutely, Dr. Cat, which is why the point about you've got to look at the entire system, and you've got to look at if all you're doing, again, if you've done a great job at outreach and recruitment, but you haven't paid attention to what's the culture like internally, what is the support like? Have you created an environment where there's talent mobility? There is the opportunity to, and these are all aspects of MET that we're looking at in partnership with HR. I should say too, and this is a testament to Adel's leadership. At the same time that I was named as the inaugural DI officer for MET, we also named a chief EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity Officer, a woman by the name of Janora Wisdom. And so we're really looking at, really making sure that our EO complaint process is shored up. We have mitigated and really eliminated any past retaliation that may have happened around reporting these cases. And so, change doesn't happen, it's not easy, nor is it quick.
Right.
But we are now putting into place all of the things that you need to really achieve culture transformation. And when this work is done right, as you and many folks tuning in are probably already aware, when it's done right, when DEI work is done right, it is about culture transformation. It feels different. It should feel different to be at MET. Now, there's a lot of great things about MET, that we have such a compelling mission.
Right.
Through 26 member agencies, we deliver water to 19 million residents across Southern California. And, there's a lot of great efforts, whether it's our conservation messaging and our education and K through 12 around conservation. And we're building a plant in Carson that will increase water supply for Southern California. There's a lot of great work going on here, but if we can really shore up and the proof will be again in the outcomes. And I always think your people are your best barometers of the culture. And so to be fair, there's a lot of people today at MET that know that it's a wonderful institution. But, I would be disingenuous if obviously, along the lines of the LA Times article, there have been ways in which this institution has not best served people, including women. And so we've got to lean into that. And, it's hard to solve a problem that you're not willing to acknowledge. Right. So I'll be the first one to say that there are things that should have never happened here. But we're doing everything we can, Dr. Cat, to ensure that MET's best days are yet to come.
Absolutely. And one of the things, whether it's at MET and throughout the agency, this is not just a MET problem, folks. Personally, I have experienced some of the sorts of things that they talk about, especially when I went out on my own. That's when the physical harassment started. I managed mostly women when I was working in the Canadian oil sands. So I was the only, I was actually transferred up there as the only project manager, primarily because they had promoted up all the men or they had been hired away by the clients. So I had a team of just about all women. There were times we would send a woman out to a job site and she'd be kicked off by the site boss who said, we don't allow women here. And when she tried to say, hey, wait a minute, that's why I moved up here, to be able to do this kind of work, company transferred her to Australia. I mean, it's just, I've had the old CEO of my company asking me to lunch while I was in grad school because he was in town to give a paper, asking me to go on a business trip with him. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, I've got this great trip. Would love to have you. Oh, it sounds really interesting. And he looked a little too excited. And so
Yeah.
I said, you're going to call Laura and you have her book an extra room. As you know, you're going to sleep in my room. And they proceeded to tell me about how the time I was working for him, he was having fantasies about me. And I knew the guy's wife and his kids, and we used to have the Christmas party at his house. And it's sickening. And unfortunately, there is retaliation and the threat of retaliation when women speak about this stuff. I had women who I wanted to have speak on the summit, women that as we started posting some of the statistics online, they start typing in the, like it's a private group for women of water, they're typing in their stories. I said, would you like to speak? And some of them said yes. A lot of them, we have almost 50 women, but a lot of them are older or younger. The ones that are almost getting tenure or almost, getting a big promotion. It's so subjective, those promotions. And if that's a time when somebody speaks up, and in my case, I spoke up not so much at the consulting firm for me, but for the younger women on my team, because they kept coming in my office crying about stuff that was going on. And when I tried to talk about it, they said, oh, this is all made up. This isn't true. None of this is true. You have to prove it. And so women are very scared. And by the time you get to a leadership position, start to get into leadership, it becomes even harder. It's those golden handcuffs, because you have so much more to lose at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your experience, Dr. Kat. And I'm sorry to hear that those things have also happened to you.
And to a lot of the women I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is way more, as the Me Too movement reveals, this is way more common than, and it's while we're trying to solve it for water industry, it's prevalent. And so, there's several different things going on here. I think one is a mindset shift. We've got to, for a long time, in gender, certainly in gender diversity conversations, we, would ask women to lean in. We've asked women to, women are leaning so far in now that they're about to
follow. Like doing a paper right? To get so far.
Right. And
it's not just fixing the women. I mean, that's part of the equation. Yes. At the other side,
we need to ask organizations to lean in, and we need to ask, and we need to celebrate truth tellers instead of punishing them. And when, I often say, if your desire to serve is greater than your ego, you will invite constructive dissent. You will invite people to share with you how you can make things better. And so, but I think that takes a certain mindset, that takes a certain view of servant leadership. So I think just as much as we talk about women in industry, we've got to talk about training for our leaders. What does it look like to be an inclusive leader? Because again, we can bring in women, we can bring in underrepresented talent, but if we haven't trained our leaders on what does it look like to build a psychologically safe team, how do you effectively coach and mentor people? How do you, effectively lead? I think that's another whole opportunity. Leadership in the water industry is a whole, inclusive leadership in the water industry is a whole nother mountain of opportunity around that. So there's another area we're looking at is effective training for all of our leaders. We've already rolled out EO training, compliance training, but going over and above compliance, how do you truly, because it's as goes the leader, goes the culture.
Right.
And so you really want to shift the culture, start working with your leadership. And so that's a whole nother part of the puzzle. Again, this is really complex to shift not only an institution, but I can't think of certainly anything more worthy of my time and talents than trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because this has been a long-standing issue for the water industry. And here's the other, there's a whole opportunity side of I mean, let me just look at it from a logic point of view. How are you ever going to win when 50% of your team is not playing? When you leave out women, women are upwards of 50% of the population. How are you ever going to win? That's the opportunity side of it. Now there's a whole nother side that's about risk. We have an enormous percentage of the population that is retirement eligible.
Mhm.
If we don't accelerate our efforts in building a diverse talent pipeline into the water industry,
Right.
you run an enormous risk to the future of and the institutional talent, the institutional history. I mean, there's so much that we've got to get right here. That's both about leveraging opportunity, but also mitigating risk for the water industry.
Yeah. And there's a myth that people seem to hold on to that as soon as these old, sexist, racist old guys, some of whom were involved in the civil rights movement and the women's movement back in the day, since they all retire, it's all going to go away. This younger generation, the men are all, woke and everything else. And we don't have to worry about that as soon as those old guys get out of the way. But that's not true. I mean, these racism, sexism, homophobia, that is all generations. A lot of the proud, I'm here in Washington, D.C. A lot of the Proud Boys who were, tearing down the Capitol were not, bunch of geezers, they're
Absolutely.
yeah.
And also to mention, Dr. Kat, there are women who have unconscious bias toward other women. And so this can't be dependent on a person. We've got to build into the system ways to mitigate bias. Yeah. And there's so much we know about the research today, coupled with HR talent practices, which is where rubber meets the road. For example, just to use one example around gender diversity, we know in talent management conversations, men tend to be promoted on potential and women have to show past performance. So here's what it might sound like in a talent conversation. Oh, Joe Schmo hasn't done that job, but he's rocked everything else that he's done. Why don't we go ahead and promote him and he'll do fabulous. But when Susie Q's promotion comes up, it might sound like this. Susie has done a great job, but she hasn't done this job. Let's see if she does the job well, and then we'll promote her. Yeah. You're applying different standards solely based on, a lot of times, that's what it's called unconscious bias. I actually teach a facilitated course called Counteracting Unconscious Bias in the online program at Cornell. But a lot of time, and if you don't have bias interrupters, if you don't have a way for checking, are we applying a different standard to Joe Schmo as we are to Susie Q, then that's what, and when you embed it in the system, it's not dependent on having enlightened folks who are committed to DEI. You have checks in the system. So regardless of who comes and goes, your systems are built to mitigate bias and to ensure more equitable outcomes. That's what we're trying to get to.
Yes. And the unconscious bias, definitely that's been a focus in the water industry. And that's where you had the sharing story stuff, which can be a little dangerous of, having been trained as a coach, as a facilitator, transformational programs, you've got to create and hold the space really well before you invite people to share their stories in that space. And sometimes people, go to a really deep workshop and like, oh, isn't this cool? I'm going to go back to my utility and have everyone share their stories. And you don't have a well-controlled space, and that can really, have a lot of backlash when people are in that uncontrolled space. We also, one of the people that I don't know if you read across this book, it's called Hush Money, How One Woman Proved Systemic Racism in a Workplace and Kept Her Job. Jackie Abram started publishing this and started distributing in her car, and it's now all over the world. And she's become an incredible speaker and workshop leader. But this book is it's actually a workbook on what to do in certain circumstances. And every single chapter is like every time she thought that she had resolved an issue, there was another roadblock, another roadblock. And what it came down to was just, a handful of individuals. And I think it's important for people to recognize the difference between people who just aren't aware, they just don't know, they, oh, you shared your story, okay, now I'm a little more conscious, versus someone in a position of, or someone, in your office making obnoxious comments about your hair or your skin color or your, accent or whatever, right? Versus someone in a position of authority who has a strongly held belief against a certain group of people. That they don't like you from the moment you walk in the door because you are X, because you're gay, because you're, autistic, because you're a woman, because you're Indian, because whatever, right? And are able to use the system. And, usually in water, we're working in a large organization, either with or contracted by or have a grant from or whatever. Typically, this work is done by big organizations. Water is big. We have big organizations involved in water. And within that, there are loopholes and there are ways that somebody can go covert. It's those behind closed doors conversations combined with, oh, you know what? We really, thank you so much for all your work. We put you on the diversity campaign last night, but we know that you've got to care for your mom. So we decided to have Joe Blow present your work at the conference coming in. Yeah. And those are the ones that are really, the stuff in the field is stuff because nobody else is there. We get out to the sites. That can be tough. Or at conferences too, that comes up, a little alcohol, whatever, lots of side hallways, or, oh, I thought you wanted me to come into your hotel room, whatever, right? Guys try to pull me into a hotel room. But in the office, people are not gonna do overt racism in public or overt sexism, in front of a lot of other people. There's way too many laws around that.
Right.
But, it's the little, you think you're all that. You don't really belong here. You're a diversity hire, you're whatever. And then couple that with using the system. That's hard.
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Cat. It's the microaggressions that happen. And they often talk about microaggressions as death by a million different cuts. And so it's the daily slights that happen where you are not fully seen as a valued member of the team or the group. And I will be the first one to agree with you that they're often the most, there's actually research that microaggressions register in the brain the same way as physical pain does.
Yeah.
And so those microaggressions are not only can be very prevalent depending on the work environment, but they really register as physical pain for people.
Well, and for a lot of us, especially, those who came in earlier, we tucked our hair up under our baseball caps and tried to be one of the boys. That was the highest compliment. Oh yeah, she's one of the boys. But, and you get a thick skin and you kind of brush it off and, maybe it adds up over time. But, I think in many cases, those little microaggression, little comments and stuff, that's less about trying to trigger you and more about seeing who else laughs, seeing who might be an ally, and then start working with others. And that's where, it goes beyond microaggression to, I'm going to get you out of this position. I don't think you belong here. Right. That's not a microaggression. That is a threat to someone's career. And people are afraid of that. Women are afraid to speak up when they see someone who, and you may not even realize someone feels that way until you get to a certain level. And the first time it happens, when you feel like you're in your genius zone and you've got a supportive team, and you don't think you're going to get this promotion, do you? And it just punches you in the gut. And it's people who actually don't want women in certain positions, or blacks, or whatever, right? It's all the intersectionalities with that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If so I think that we have to, it starts with our values as people, but also our values as an institution. Do we truly value diversity? And do we see diversity as a strength, or as a threat? And if you see diversity as a strength, then you not only welcome it and seek it out, you celebrate it, you promote it, and you ensure that you surround yourself with a diversity of people, perspectives, etc. And so I think that that's a conversation whose time has come in the water industry, because for so long it has been generations who largely look like the generations before them who are running the industry. And so, if
And the women who came in tried to be one of the boys. That was, they weren't supposed to talk about that stuff.
And they no longer have to, because and this is why allyship and moving from a bystander to an upstander, these are why those conversations are so important. And if microaggressions can be powerful, so can microaffirmations. And that's all the work of behavioral change. And that's all the work of training leaders to show up in ways in which they truly foster an inclusive environment. And so there's work to be done there too, because again, you look at the conversation holistically, the recruitment, the hiring, the promotion, the systemic change, but the behavior change in leadership has to also go along with it, or you're going to bring women into an environment where they're not going to last long because they don't feel truly valued, let alone respected or celebrated in your culture.
We had some other conversations as well with folks working on for those women who decide to go out on their own. And we do, we got the Great Resignation. We have a long history in the water sector of, at some point, people might hang their own shingle, and become a contractor. And there is another area of vulnerability, because a lot of the harassment and discrimination laws are about employers and employees. And yes, nominally, it may also apply to contractors, but often they might be embedded, they might be, working very closely as part of the team. But it can be really, it's a tough position to be in if something happens, whether to report and risk losing a contract. Have you guys, as you're beginning to put those structures in place, how are you also looking at the contractors and the vendors and all the innovative? I know you guys do a great job with your startup incubator relationship there, Peggy. Yeah.
So I'm happy to report, Dr. Kat, that reporting up under my office is also business outreach and community engagement. And we have made it, because we're one of the original signers on the Equity and Infrastructure Pledge. It is a public commitment to increase procurement opportunities to historically underutilized businesses. So we are looking at how do we expand and look at more equitable opportunities to our contracting for contractors and for procurement opportunities, etc. And so this is a great team around this, a team of folks on the DEI team that are really focused on ensuring that we make good on our equity and infrastructure pledge. And so this is a holistic 360-degree commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion for Met, first and foremost to our employees, to our suppliers, to our member agencies, and in the communities in which we serve. So it's a lot of work, but it is not for the faint of heart, nor is it. There's a saying: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. Yeah. And so we also have to bring people along. We've got to position a very powerful case for why this is not a women's issue. This is how do we all win? Because, as the pie gets bigger, so does the opportunity, so do the ideas that are present at the table when we've created environments where we can really leverage collective genius and insight. And the amount, there are so many problems to solve in the water industry. We're in the middle of a historic drought. Well, that's been mitigated with our recent rainfall, and so I don't know if it's
temporarily mitigated. But
what I will say is, I'll take that back. What I will say is, climate change is real, and climate change is here to stay. And building a resilient workforce, leveraging the ideas that come from diversity. This is the only way we will be successful in the water industry. So the next chapter we write for Met and the water industry has to have a strong focus where diversity, equity, inclusion, we lead from the front in writing the next chapter. Yeah. And so that's absolutely where we're going. And we haven't even talked about, Dr. Cap, the global issues around women in water. I mean, we know that in the developing world, it is women, the disproportionate burden of carrying water, quite often literally, to villages, towns, is figuratively and literally on the backs of women. So as we advance economic opportunity for women and girls in water, we unleash women's abilities we know as you invest in women, the one bet that's going to pay multiple returns is investment in women. In fact, it is the one end that accomplishes several different means: thriving communities, thriving families. Women are at the heart of all of this, whether and it's magnified in the developing world, but it is absolutely true in our own backyards. Yeah. And so this is the leadership conversation of the 21st century, not only in the water industry,
and in our country as well, where we have.
Oh, I love it.
Lack of, you've seen this, right? The Closing the Water Act, the 2 million people in the US, this came out right before COVID. Yes. So that we have, we're 2 million people, just 2 million people in the US that don't have water and sanitation in their home. That, because a lot of times when people talk about women and water when we are showing this video, these summits is during the week of UN water. And that's why we're doing this during the week of the 20th to 24th, is that the whole world is coming to the US for UN water. The first time we've had a UN water since 1977. And so often on the international stage, we talk about women and water, not women and water. And the two are connected. Whether we're talking about in South Central LA with women-led households with low-income communities, or whether we're talking about the other side of the globe, having women in decision-making positions and engaged in water-related organizations makes a difference in understanding what's really going on in those communities.
Absolutely, which is why gender equality and clean water and sanitation are two of the UN goals for sustainable development. These things are so interconnected, and you really want sustainable, long lasting institutions. You have got to lean in on women, gender equality, and there's such a nexus to water, thriving communities. They're all interconnected. So I really think, am I biased in this conversation? Yes, probably I am, but there's so much evidence that that the what I said, the one and that really accomplishes several different means is a robust and long-standing commitment to investing in women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's really good to hear what you guys are working on. And, because I really was, when this story came out, and obviously we were still in COVID when the story broke, and then the audit, and then, it was right about the time that AWWA had their first WEFTEC had their first live meeting that was half virtual, half in the room, and then AWWA had their first, live, in the room conference, and then WEFTEC had another conference, almost full capacity, and a lot of stuff on diversity. And I wasn't hearing this story, and so often we are an industry of problem solvers, and usually anytime something makes the news about water, if it's a spill, if it's a drought, if it's a labor dispute, you can count on seeing the head of that agency at a big water conference doing essentially a post-mortem and saying, this is what really happened, this is what we learned, and this is how we're going forward. So I hope to see that. I don't know if it's Water Week, I don't know if it's AWWA ACE, but I look forward to seeing MWD being able to really say, this is real, this is what happened. It happens at other utilities as well. This is not just an MWD problem, but how do you actually put those procedures in place so that people who speak up are not retaliated against, so that people can be protected, so we know, we can't just assume that everybody's a good guy and oh yeah, you must have, you can't prove it, so whatever, it's let's make this a place that all women can thrive and not have to deal with some of the issues that came up, and really glad to see you there, and give our best to Adel. And any final thoughts for our audience before we go? And for folks here, please do type in your comments. This is an interactive conversation. This is not just canned videos. You're able to type in live. Liji, you'll be able to see when it plays live. It's going to play once the week of the 20th, 24th, and then we're going to do a whole encore week, because so many people have World Water Day week things and UN water things, so you can do it all again the next week. So you'll be able to answer any questions, comments, anything like that. So let us know what you guys are thinking on this. Liji, any final thoughts before we go?
Just thanks for the opportunity, Dr. Kat. And what I would say for anyone tuning in is that this is really tough work, but the only time you fail is when you think you're done. We have to be relentless in our pursuit of a high bar and a high standard for how people are valued and celebrated, and it will define the future of the water industry. And I'm only honored to play a role not only here at MET, in partnership with many of the women and colleagues that I work with, and men, strong male allies, is going to take all of us to write the next chapter of the water industry.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Kat. Great to meet you.
Thank you for being here. Come on back, watch all the videos. If you miss it the first week, watch it the second week. If you can't catch it either week, get the VIP pack so you can watch it on your own time. But please, be part of this conversation, and together we can all create a better world for women and men and everyone in between. So.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Kat. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for this extraordinary conversation, one of 45 extraordinary conversations we had as part of the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we explored where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can stop those leaks, and even bring women back to water. I hope that you will enjoy all of these amazing interviews. If you don't have a chance to watch all of them during the summit, you have the opportunity to join us with a power pack and get lifetime access to all the videos, as well as an opportunity to join us for 30 days in a brand new community where we will dig even deeper in live facilitated conversations about some of the issues that are facing women in water. Look forward to seeing you there. Please join us at watercitizen.org/women, watercitizen.org/women for more information. See you again soon.